to Muslim. And they tended to have Dalit Hindu workers. Now what has happened now is that after this violence, all of these Muslim landless workers were attacked and the houses burned, and they ran, and they took refuge in those villages where Muslims were landlords. And what sadly has happened is because this hatred is irreconciled, nobody has come to heal, and the sense of the love jihad, symbolizing how dangerous the Muslim community is, has resulted in a situation where these people are never going to return home. And so there's a redistribution of populations happening, where now the Muslim landless people are going to work for Muslim landlords, and the Hindu Dalit workers will work for the. I find that so profoundly tragic, because the whole idea of India gets lost if we are going to allow identities to determine, and to be redistributed on these kinds of lines. Anyway, so the third set of victors is those segments of the Hindu community who have come to accept, short or long term, the Muslim as the enemy, and therefore have this sense of triumphalism. So let me repeat: the victors are the middle class, the corporate class, the middle class, the aspirational middle class, and the Hindutva-ized majoritarian segments, those affected by the majoritarian anti-Muslim ideologies. They are the sense of people who are feeling a sense of triumphalism. Now, who are the ones who feel themselves, as I said, profoundly saddened, despaired, fearful, hopeless as a result of this election? Which are those social groups? So on the one hand, on the first is a group that I would call the secular Indian. And I continue to be convinced that they still form the majority of the Hindu and the Muslim communities in India. There's some discussion, some friends of mine say that after this election you'll have to give up that belief. But I am still convinced that that is the majority, and there is a sense of sadness and despair in that group, and that's the first set of social losers of this election. The second is minorities, and minorities. We talk about Muslims, we talk about Christians. We're also talking about other forms of minorities, like sexual minorities. There's an enormous sense of fear among the LGBT community, particularly those who are socially poorer classes, because of, again, and it's quite similar to the Bush Republican kind of ideology, which prevails. But the Muslim community in particular is feeling a sense of the day after the elections, the day of the elections. We work in some areas with homeless population, very large Muslim population. My colleague also was a young Muslim young man, and he was going on his auto rickshaw. The auto rickshaw driver was also Muslim, and we went into this area. And normally, there's a lot of activity there. And that day, there was a sense of an uneasy quiet. And he asked him, "Ki kya hua hai?" So he said, "Ki Musliman khauf kha liya hai with the election." And I found that a very poignant kind of expression, and I hear it all the time. And so you're seeing, and across India over the last 3 or 4 months, you're seeing small skirmishes across. I think the big thing that we probably have collectively accomplished is that you're not going to see a big massacre like 1984 2002. Because of the collective response of some of us to ensure that, that there is legal accountability, even till today, the fact that it has been a huge embarrassment, it has caused people, ministers have gone to jail, etc., that we're not going to probably see large communal massacres, but small, chote events, across, which create the same kind of fear, where the loss of human life is less. Like Muzaffarnagar, the loss of human life is still less than 100. But the number of people displaced for 50,000. Sexual violence, burning of houses, complete social boycott, inability to return home. Assam is a different story because it is not a majority-minority situation there. It's really a battle between many oppressed minorities. But there again, in Kokrajhar, we saw less than 100 people dead, but we saw 5 lakh people, 500,000 people, who were displaced from their homes. And so I think we're seeing a new form of communal mobilization and violence, where loss of human life is kept in control, but hatred is very effectively spread and rooted, and this division of populations is resulting. So the minority is the second social loser of this election. And who, my friends, would you think is the third and largest social loser of this election?
English generalists.
Pardon?
English generalists.
No, not English journalists. Why would you say that?
The kinds of Rajdeep Sardesai, Barkhadar, and
Why do you feel
and
that?
the clan.
Why do you feel that?
I mean, they had been on a mission to downgrade Modi for like last 10 years, and seeing him come to power has really burned them a lot. And I was there at New York even when Rajdeep Sardesai was like spewing venom to all of us. Yeah. So I think their chant is also sizable number of people who are trying to.
They're not a sizable number of people.
At least a set of people who have who are the capacity to influence people. Yeah.
There's influence on both sides, and obviously there's a great degree of influencing by both sets of people of both belief systems. There's no less, and there's been a huge degree of social political media mobilization in support of Modi, far more effectively, and there has been against him as well. No, the third and the largest social group, which has a sense of profound loss and fear, is really the poor, because they're not part of aspirational India. They're not people who are going to see hopes of jobs, of their lives changing. And with land acquisition acts being weakened, or with NREGA being downgraded, there was a weak and inadequate system of welfare that was being constructed, very poorly, very inadequately. But the prospect of even that getting dismantled and their destinies not changing is the third group. And so you see India, in a sense, divided between one set of, and I'm not saying who's right and wrong and so on. I think we need to recognize that there is one set of people who see in the persona of Narendra Modi, and he's a powerful, charismatic expression of a certain set of ideological, social, economic belief systems. And in those who see themselves enrolled and benefiting from that, or participant in, or believing in that belief system, the middle classes, the corporate classes, the corporate sector, the middle classes, the aspirational middle class, especially the young, and those influenced by Hindutva ideologies, they have the sense of triumphalism. And those who feel a sense of loss are those who worry about majoritarian ideologies. Those who, the minorities at large. And large segments of the very poor who are not part of India's growth story and have there's no possibility, no aspiration, no dream in that imagination for them. So, and let me also underline that what has happened in India is actually not unique in the world. You're seeing similar kinds, the Reagan-Thatcher movement, but also George Bush's election represented a similar kind of division between a political division between these two imaginations. France, for instance, Le Pen is a convicted racist. He's convicted for racism. His political party, which is not like it's not simply sort of like a communal right-wing party like say the BJP is. It is a outright racist formation, and something like a Praveen Tagodia kind of personality. Would you? 1 in every 4 French voters today are supporting Le Pen's daughter. Across in the EU elections, you saw a very substantial shift to the very far right. And the entire center of gravity of the discourse has shifted more and more rightwards. So a party like the Aam Aadmi Party today is being seen as a left party, which even a few years ago, it would never have been seen as a left party. But what understanding of where the center is has got shifted so far rightwards that a centrist party is looking left, and so we need to recognize this movement of what is a good state and what is a good society. And I think that is really what we need to resolve together. And it is these two different imaginations of what is a good society and a good state. So, in a sense, the middle class, the corporate class, and the majoritarian Hindu groups have strangely been made to feel that they are the persecuted. That, we are hardworking people, we pay taxes, our money is being taken away and being distributed to people, with cheap grain and, to break stones in Narega works which don't happen, and, in Qarz Maafi for farmers. This is the way our good money is being wasted. Factually, the entire amount of subsidies that the middle class receives is about 3 times more than the subsidies that the poor receive. Every time you get 1 gas cylinder in Delhi, or you switch on your SUV or your air conditioner, you're actually drawing more subsidy than the person who is going to a PDS shop and getting cheap green. But we don't remember that. We have developed a sense of being aggrieved by welfare policies. We're saying that it is taking away. I remember after the food bill, there was a lot of debate. Since I had convened the group within the National Advisory Council which drafted the food bill, I found myself in television, in front of television cameras, for an entire week defending the bill against everybody who was enraged, including usually the anchors. And in one of the debates, a very well-known industrialist who's otherwise very, somebody you respect, she turned around and finally said that, I'm really fed up. We are rich because, we have money because we worked hard. We have worked hard to earn our money. We have done nothing to harm the economy. Why should we be taxed to feed the poor? And I think that was the core of the discussion. And I had to turn around and say, I'm sorry, but the poor work hard. You would agree, much harder. They have done even less to harm the economy. And in a good society, people of wealth and privilege are happy to share some of it in order to ensure a better life for the poor. I mean, there was this kind of this sense of aggrieving, a sense of being, of losing out among people of high privilege is one of the strange things that has happened. And their opposition to the notions of welfare, you stand. And then the majority community has been convinced that they are being persecuted at the expense of the minority community. So there's this other sense of being aggrieved. And I'm not here to say, obviously, you all know where I stand. That is not the point. The point is for you, each of us, the time has come when we have to take our positions on this. So I think every country in the world in the 21st century has to sort itself out on two critical questions. And what has happened in our elections, what is happening in many other electoral choices in the United States and in France and the UK, across Europe, in Turkey, in many places you see. Basically, how are we going to deal with inequality? Question number one. And second is, how are we dealing with extremely, increasingly diverse populations living together, people of different faiths, different identities, different cultural beliefs. And the political choices we are making is about two very different understandings of how we answer these two questions. So the triumphalism is of those who believe more and more that we need untrammeled markets, and governments primarily need to address themselves to making markets function better with fewer and fewer constraints both of the green and the red variety, meaning environmental constraints on higher and faster investment, and labor related. So we've already seen in the first 3 months of this new government the dilution of a number of labor laws. Our labor laws in any case actually covered only 10% of the workforce. But there's been an attempt to, there have been amendments there. There's talk of amending the Land Acquisition Act, freeing up, making it much easier. So there's that understanding. And then there's an alternative understanding which people like Amartya Sen and others have, which is that we are for markets, but we believe that you cannot, morally and in terms of hard economics, even in terms of hard economics, I believe that we cannot build India's economic growth story on such an unequal foundation any longer. We've reached a certain level. Because India's great benefit is its demographic dividend. As I said, we have the largest young working population in the world. The median age in China is 35, ours is 25. So we need to, to cash in on that. But every second child is malnourished, which means that every second person entering the workforce has body and brain not formed to full potential. We don't have social security for most of our population. We have very poor education. So we don't have a workforce, China, South Korea, all of these countries were able to actually push the economic growth story sustainably because they had productive workers comprehensively, they had well-nourished, well-educated workers, and it contributed. So you had large private investment, but you also had a workforce which was much more. So the belief here is that investments in nutrition, health, education are not doles. They are investments in India's greatest economic resource. Whereas people like Jagdish Bhagwati and Arvind Panikar argue that the state is incapable of delivering these kinds of services effectively. And what we really need to have is untrammeled markets. It will generate growth, it will generate jobs. Everybody will be better off in the long run. And it will also generate more resources finally for social spending. So there are two different imaginations here working here. On the second question of how you deal, so one is address inequality, the other is forget about inequality, let this unequal market-led growth model work. In the end, people will be better off. And the second big debate is about diverse populations. What should be the relationship of the majority with the minority? And India has an old civilizational plus a constitutional commitment to protecting diversity. So the word secularism has actually very different meanings in different parts of the world. Europe, France, and increasingly in other countries. Secularism would mean that in a classroom like this, a girl would not be permitted to wear a hijab. In India, that would be the very antithesis of secularism. Our idea of secularism would be to defend her right to wear it. I choose not to wear it. But if she feels that that is her way of life, she should also be given her space. So how do we deal with diverse populations? Are we comfortable with people having different faith systems, different cultural norms, different languages, or do we want to homogenize them and subordinate them into what we see as the majority? So India's elections are a watershed because these debates have, in a sense, come to the fore. And people are making choices on it. But they're making choices largely on the basis of where their social or ideological positions are. And I think that we need to understand, finally, as I said, it's based on our imagination of what is a good state and what is a good society. When I joined the IAS in 1980, there was no doubt that the theory of good government was that a government primarily existed to defend and uphold the poor and the weak. The practice varied greatly, but there was no doubt about that is what a good state is. From the mid-90s or so, the theory of government, a good government, has been that government is best which facilitates private markets. It's a profound shift in our imagination of the good state. Likewise, the idea of a good society has shifted more and more from the notions of social solidarity to those of every person pursuing their individual interest. Michael Sandel, who's a very popular philosopher in Harvard, right close by, he talks about his great worries about us moving from a market economy to a market society. A market society is one. You see, a market economy is rightly based on utilitarian considerations of profit and loss, what you benefit and what, and so on. Are you going to build a society which is built on the same notions of profit and loss? Or is there something more that social relations entail? So when you have, we talk about social protection policies, for instance. Social protection, Noam Chomsky, well-known American philosopher, public intellectual, he said something. He said, what is social protection? And I liked his definition greatly. He said social protection is basically the idea that we should take care of each other. That's what social protection is about. That if somebody is weak, somebody has fallen down, if somebody is old, is infirm, is disadvantaged in any way, we need to take care of each other. Today I take care of you, tomorrow you take care of me. That is the notion of social solidarity. And it has different words. I mean, Dr. Ambedkar, when he wrote the Constitution, also said that we often talk about liberty and equality as the two principal features of our Constitution. He said the third is no less important, and that is the notion of fraternity. And he said, liberty without fraternity, equality without fraternity, are emptied out of meaning. Fraternity is the same idea of that we socially, we are part of a society where we need to take care of each other. Where you cannot ask the question that this lady said to me, the industrialist said to me on television, why should I be taxed to feed the poor? And so what is our notion of a good society? Am I happy you're growing up in this country, your kids will have the best life opportunities in the world, that 230 million people sleep hungry? Does it worry you? The fact that, if you were an adolescent, there's some young women here, if you were an adolescent girl in India today, what would life have looked like to you on an average? Not even talking about the bottom, I'm talking about the average. 4% chance that you would be in college, 4% chance. So aspiration to bhul hi jao. When we talk about, we assume, when we talk about the young, we talk about things that it's that 4% which can have that aspiration. Chances are that by the age of 16 you would be married. By the age of 18 you'd have 1 or 2 babies. You'd be underweight. You would be defecating in the open. 80% chances if you were living in a village. Almost equal chances if you were living in a slum. No menstrual protection at all. Bathing, if you're living in a slum, under the open tap, with no menstrual protection. Defecating in the open. And so on and so forth. So let's be real. And the fact that it's okay, I should worry about my life and my kids' life, and I should be indifferent to lives which have not even the possibilities of hope. So I see myself standing here because that is my imagination of a good society. That is my expectation of a good state. But I might be wrong. But you have to make the choices. You have to know that you have to make these choices. And I think that is what this watershed election has done. It has thrown into sharp relief these different imaginations. Is my imagination of a good society one where a person of a minority identity is frightened of displaying his identity? Ram Guha had said that the Hindutva dream for India is to create a Hindu Pakistan. Basically, a majoritarian environment in which minorities are allowed to live, but they have to subordinate themselves socially, culturally, economically, politically. Is that an imagination I share? Or would I like to see an India where India belongs equally to persons of every faith or the lack of it, of every language, of every culture? People can live without fear, follow their practices and beliefs, hold their heads high, and are judged by the qualities of their character rather than the God they worship. So these are profound, immediate, important questions that I believe this election reminds us that we have to make clear choices. And what is for you the good state, and what for you is the good society that you would like to see? The city I live in, Delhi has about 40 to 50% of Delhi's people live in slums. You know what percentage of residential land is under slums? 3%. So 3% of our land is for this 50% population, and we resent them that. We want them to be demolished, we want them to be pushed out. We don't have water, drinking water, sewerage, drainage. In fact, that is one of my big cribs with the Aam Aadmi Party's declarations. And Amartya Sen actually said something very profound again to them. He said, the Aam Aadmi Party has to decide who is the Aam Aadmi. Is it the person who wants cheaper water and electricity, or the person who has no water and electricity?
I was asking about the nomadic groups,
And okay.
those who don't have a slum to live in as well.
Yeah. So the nomadic groups, the denotified tribes, there's along with them, India is actually an extremely unequal society. So you have layers and layers of inequality. So you have bonded workers, you have the denotified tribes, you have people like, in unclean occupations like manual scavengers, etc. You have,
The gypsies.
Gypsies, homeless populations. The denotified tribes, just for those who don't know, it's really good that you're talking about them.
Can I just add on to this?
Yeah.
These nomadic gypsies.
Yeah.
I lived in Madhya Pradesh and walked among those people, like 4 tribals, Shaharia, Gaunt, Bhil. These 3 are the tribal populations who are gypsies basically in the central India.
Just have some No. No.
Yeah, so government initiatives,
majoritarian component to it, but it is the previous governments have also not worked hard enough.
See, the failures of the failures of the previous government are profound, are comprehensive. It's completely obvious that the space was left, the vacuum was created because of a government which neither communicated, had enormous corruption scandals, did not seem to deliver, etc., etc. No doubt about that. It is also true, though, that that is not the full story. I mean, that the last 10 years have also seen the creation of the right to information.
Yes, but
the-
also something like the Right to Education Act was probably
But the right-
one of the successes which they
It's not really, wasn't really a success because the Right to Education Act required a growth from 3% to 6% of GDP in terms of public investment, which they never did. So it was never really got implemented.
And also, personally, I think it is a cop-out by the government to strengthen public education rather than imposing a 25% quota on private schools.
So that's a very small part of the whole. I mean, 25%. See, elite schools cover about 2% of the children. Out of that, in class 1, you get imposing a 25% reservation, which is state supported. That is, I think, it comes into a very different category. It's largely creating inclusive schools. It's like the desegregation movement in the US in the 1960s. That has a different significance to say that you cannot have, the law doesn't permit children of disadvantage to come into elite schools, but effectively they'll never be allowed. So you're saying let your domestic health child and your child study together. That has a different significance. I think it has much greater significance for the quality of education for a child of privilege.
But it is
Yeah.
telling that.
Yeah, but the 99% of the RT is about public systems and public responsibility. That it laid down certain standards. What does RT say? RT basically says that every child has the right to free and compulsory education in a neighborhood school, not distant than about 1.5 kilometers, where there will be no fees charged. There will be certain quality standards. These will be the qualifications of the teachers. This will be the qualification of the school. Briefly, that is what the RT says. That's the core of it. But for that to have been accomplished, it required us to step up hugely the level of public investment, which we did not do. So, so all of the enormous failures in what the previous government did. But today the debate is more ideological. The debate, see, are we saying that we believe that we should have an RT, we should have higher public investments in schools? Our children do deserve a better life. The poor do deserve a better life. The previous government did it very badly. That's one discussion. But that is not what Modi is offering. Modi is offering actually a much more efficient delivery of a certain imagination of government. And I'm not saying it's a good or a bad imagination. It's a different imagination. It's an imagination that Manmohan Singh completely carried, but could not deliver surgically and effectively, which is an imagination that basically you're saying that the state is too venal and corrupt to deliver anything. So in the end, you have to depend on the private sector, which is driven by profit. You have to create an environment where private sector is left free to, it will create wealth, it will create jobs. And in the end, everyone will be better off. That is one imagination. There's another that this is, let the markets function, but there'll be a whole segment of people who are left out, and you need to provide directly to them. That's a debate. So nobody is saying we are voting for Modi because we would like the state to function better. We're voting for Modi because he's demonstrated market-led. What is the Gujarat model? What is the Gujarat model? Let me just explain. See, Gujarat model has been the extreme of market-led economic growth. Now, a particular sort of moment there was when the Tatas were brought in after West Bengal. You know the terms on which Tata was brought in? This was not publicized, and through an RTI, people have got this. But this is now factually true. Tata invested X amount of money. 3X came as public, was given from public funds to Tata at 0.1% rate of interest, repayable after 20 years, plus free water, electricity, this, that, and the other. CSE has calculated that 50% of the cost of the nano car was public money. Now, you might justify that as, now there's X amount of public money. So Gujarat has some of the lowest investments in school, in education, in healthcare, in public healthcare, and in nutrition. It was rated by IFPRI as being alarming. It was below UP and Odisha. It was a little above Bihar, so thank God for that. But so there is a kind of an imagination. So there's very rapid economic growth. Industrialists love going there. But you also have very low public investments in the social sector and so on. Now, that is an imagination. Now, he is promising to deliver that even more effectively at a national level. Let me give you one more statistic. The expectation that high investment, high private sector investment is going to yield jobs. That is ultimately why we would support markets. How much, in the years of highest economic growth, those 5 or 6 years, how many jobs were created in India? 3 million jobs. When the number of people added to the workforce was about 57 million. And that is just the new workers, plus, the huge backlog of very poor levels of employment. So now it is factually established that the years of high economic growth were almost years of jobless growth. And the kind of employment, even this 3 million that was created, was largely by pushing out people from foreman into contract into home-based, completely casualized work. So the factory floor is disappearing. People are being, told you go into the slums, so you have no responsibility for their work conditions, etc., etc. So I see no labor protection happening. So you're dismantling that further. Now, yeah.
So you're saying there are two different imaginations. Probably the election result came from a frustration that the earlier, other imagination opposed to Modi has not really worked for.
Yes. No, absolutely. Who has it not worked for, and to what extent it has not worked for? It's a matter of has it worked for me? Has it worked for the poor? It's something that you'll have to think about. I mean, the same Amartya Sen, whom I'm quoting quite often, has also said 10 years ago there was no RTI, there was no ASHA, there was no Rural Health Mission, there was no NREGA, and so on and so forth. With all the flaws, there was no Forest Rights Act. The Land Action Act was much more oppressive. With all its flaws, there has been changes in the lives of the poor. But there has also been venality, there's also been corruption of a profound and extreme level. I am extremely furious and have no defense whatsoever. I have no reason to defend the earlier government. But today the debate is not about, if the debate was to look for a government which which believes in welfare and believes in pluralism, but does it more effectively. That's not what we are asking for. We are looking for a government which is abandoning the idea of welfare and abandoning the idea of pluralism for something that is different and will do it efficiently.
Now, Modi has been saying, come and make in India. But we know, we have seen the experience of America and China. See, America could have made anything if it wanted, but it could not compete with China. So now we are trying already tested and failed policies.
But China did it effectively.
Yeah.
China did.
So we are going to, if we follow Modi, come and make in India. Whereas the internet technologies and all these are changing the future. So what is the future?
No, actually, my sense is that, see, the thing about Modi, and again, I must have the disclaimer. I'm a strong and vocal opponent, and I have been for the last 10 or 15 years of what Modi stands for, because I believe that he stands for the opposite of some of the things that I hold most sacred, which is the idea of a caring welfare state and a pluralist society. So but I objectively watching what is, most of the things that he's been talking about is basically in new language and packaging exactly what the earlier government had promised. So when the election, no, I have no problem with continuity. I have also no problem with repackaging. My problem is that, do we have an analysis of why that they failed, and what are we going to do differently to make it happen? That's what I'm listening for. I'm not hearing. Now, if we could not create an environment for manufacturing earlier, what is it that is going to create an environment for manufacturing, labor-intensive manufacturing today? If we can, it will be wonderful. That's where the jobs will come. That's where economic growth is going to be sustained. My understanding is that we cannot, what China was able to do and we are not able to do is because China had universal, good quality education of all its workers. Firstly, that was how we started off. It ensured their health care, it ensured, so what we are trying to do is that without providing, our public investment in health is 1.5%. It's one of the lowest in the world. Now, 1.5% of the GDP, whereas it should be at least 3%. Our education, 3% of the GDP, where it should be very minimally 6%. We're not making those public investments. And Modi is certainly not promising to do those. So I cannot see how we can become a manufacturing hub with uneducated, unskilled, low nourished, demoralized workers.
No.
So I'm saying that I would be really happy if you have a Make in India imagination by saying this is what the earlier government did wrong and we want to do now. He said, so he had this big thing, we're going to open bank accounts for all people. They had exactly the same program in the UPA, the direct benefit program. I know what went wrong there. You don't have financial inclusion of large segments of the population. People don't have, their banks are not available. Banks are available. They're not willing to, actually the whole idea that energy and pensions would be paid through banks has actually, sounds very nice sitting here or sitting in Delhi. But on the ground it means for that old person that earlier at least I used to get the pension, गाँव में वो आता था, 150 रुपए 200 रुपए मुझे देता था, 50 रुपए खा लेता था, मिल तो जाता था मुझे कुछ, very unhappy वो 50 रुपए क्यों खा रहा है. Up now I am told that it will happen transparently to the banks, so I have to go 20 kilometers away, spend money from my pocket. I go to the bank, I wait all day. The bank manager says, I don't have time for you, come back again tomorrow, come back a third day. So I end up spending far more to access that same facility because we have not been able to do it. I do not hear how they are going to, this government is planning to ensure that that same set of mistakes doesn't happen as it's already begun to happen. So my
They're
problem
probably giving
is,
a debit card, right? They're
Pardon?
probably giving a debit card with the account.
so that, see, the idea of debit card has to work somewhere. I mean, where
Right. So they're planning to have ATMs very regularly.
yeah,
Electricity, there is no
No,
electricity.
yeah. So that system has collapsed. So system is building up.
My friend, what I'm saying is that exactly these was the plans earlier. You had the whole idea of the banking correspondent. You're going to have mobile ATMs.
Yeah.
You're going to have, every village is going to have a guy.
You know, it's a chicken and egg problem. I mean, where do you start? He has started somewhere, and
No, he's not started. It's already been there before. So I'm saying that I need to hear, for me to be convinced, and I'd be delighted to be proved wrong, that this is what the earlier government failed for these reasons. And we are going to do it, we have diagnosed these to be the problems. This is how we are setting about to solve those problems, and therefore we will deliver where the earlier government did not. Then I'll be convinced and I'll be happy. I'm not hearing that. And I'm trying to watch quite objectively.
What I was trying to say is that if you look at Simon Kuznets's theories, that you have a processes. First you have agricultural growth, then industrial growth, then service growth. So we are going through these phases. You cannot really contradict.
No, India leapt from agriculture straight into the services sector. But we have found that the services sector has a certain capacity to absorb and provide employment, and the millions are not going to get their work through it. I think we have to think afresh. In fact, if you ask me, so, suppose I was to be asked, I would see, where would I see the solution? Number one, agriculture continues to employ 56% of our population. It contributes 15% of the GDP. It has just 5% of public investment. Even that 5% of public investment largely is biased towards supporting big farmers through irrigation, electricity, chemical fertilizer kind of subsidies. We have to have much higher, if I want to get jobs for the millions, I have to invest far more in this largest sector. I cannot kill agriculture and the farming sector in the way that we are seeing people are desperately. Things like Narega, etc., if you are able to ensure small amounts of more money in the hands of millions of more people, it is another way to stimulate growth and local manufacturing. So maybe we could actually create local, on the one hand have a more educated workforce, on the other hand put more money in the hands of, or small amounts of more money in the hands of millions of more people. Create an effective market not of 400 million people, of 800 million people. Now, I'm at least talking to you about how I would see solutions different from what the earlier government has done. I'm not hearing this yet. I'm seeing them, what they're saying is that we're doing exactly what they want to do, but we'll do it much better.
You remember Jawaharlal Nehru's emphasis on industry when he came in? Then when the famines came, we had to reverse that. We had to go back to agriculture. Then we became dependent on PL480s, huge imports. So if you are now imposing a policy of common build in India, neglecting agriculture, I think you are going to be...
It'll be fatal to complete this process which UPA government has started of killing agriculture and the farming.
Now the idea is to replace it with corporate farming. I mean, that's the push is towards that.
Democracies grow faster and all that.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question, it's very basic. Apparently India has been surplus in food production. And while these the so-called, wherever they hold the grains, it's being pilfered or being eaten by rodents. How do you explain so many children and going, hungry, going to bed, or in weddings you throw away so much of food?
I've written,
That bothers me. I think the food should be sufficient for everyone.
I've written a full book about that. In my latest book was called Ash in the Belly, India's Unfinished Battle Against Hunger. I think it's a very important question. It is built around this unequal growth model, where we had 80 million tons of grain, and how much that is, you won't even, it's hard. What is 80 million tons? So Dres said that he was telling us that it means that if you put each bag of grain in a line, you know how much 80 million tons is? You can go from the earth to the moon, you can come back, and you can go around the world. We have that much of grain in our godowns, and every second child is malnourished. 230 million people sleep hungry. We filed a petition. I'm a commissioner of the Supreme Court on the right to food, and we said distribute that food. It seems the most obvious thing. Don't let it rot, distribute it, let people have more nourishment. We don't seem to know what we do. But in the neoliberal growth model, of which both Manmohan Singh and Modi are proponents, this is an unacceptable state intervention. It interferes with market forces and cost cutting.
You mean there is no administrative channel, nothing that can help in the distribution?
No. So the food bill promises to do that. The food bill promises to 800 million people will get this grain. That is one of the big things. So the old government passed the law with no intention of implementing it in the last 6 months. The present government, the period, actually the law is now being flouted because they haven't gone back to Parliament to amend it. But the time period is over. Nobody is implementing it.
So, I remember some time during the debates about right to food that some states have much more efficient implementation, and that the right to food will in fact reduce their
Chhattisgarh and Tamil Nadu.
Tamil Nadu. So, I guess that leaves my question is, why don't we have a more federalized or more decentralized form?
The final format of the food bill is very federalized. In fact, I think excessively so in some ways, in my opinion. But whatever Tamil Nadu, etc., is getting is being protected. How it has got federalized is that they've left the rule making of how the person will be selected, the entire reform distribution process, etc., to every state to do its own thing. And it's causing a lot of problems on the ground. I felt the law should have been a little more prescriptive than it is. It is now, if you read the law, everything is being decided by the states. More than I believe it should. Yes.
Could you tell us how to join certain kinds of organizations that would help to support this progressive, compassionate welfare state that you're advocating?
Yeah, that's the work that I'm trying to do, both at the level of ideas and at the level of work on the ground, and I think there are other people like that. So I direct a center called the Center for Equity Studies. So that is at the level of ideas, trying to have this kind of discussion. We're also producing an India exclusion report talking about the people getting left out. We feel that we have to at least acknowledge that there is this large population getting left out, and that the present growth strategies, which the new government is only going to implement with far greater effectiveness and will, is not going to even conceptually reach. I think that what both Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram, Montague, and Modi and his followers are actually saying is, just forget about the poor. एक दो जनरेशन तो भूल जाओ, ना उनकी स्थिति बदली है पहले, ना अब बदलेगी. Let the rest of India move ahead. And a day will come when we'll have generated enough wealth that we'll start looking at those poor people. Chidambaram was asked in one of his things, and Montague separately, when will India's poverty go? And please remember that their the definition of poverty by them is not a poverty line, but a starvation line, with 25 rupees and 30 rupees a day kind of thing. That poverty, they both said separately, is going to end in the year 2040. Now, they're not even promising any living poor person today that your life is going to change, and we're talking about that poverty, the starvation line. We're not even talking about a proper poverty line. I feel that that is the reality. Hum kahen, nahi kahen. We are basically saying we have 400 million people, great middle class, aspirational, maybe 100 million more will come in. We are bigger market than all of Europe. Everybody is very excited. We'll all have better and better lifestyles. And people out there, let's stop. We don't make films about them. We don't write books about them. They're not part of our imagination. They're not part of our conscience any longer. And that's the reality.
So how do we, as Americans of conscience, support this vision?
I think we have to.
Besides joining AID.
I think we have to care and enunciate this much more. I mean, I'm a person who has always believed a lot more in direct work in action. I reached a point, especially the last year, and looking at how this election has turned out, I believe that the real battle today is the battle of ideas and of imaginations. And I think we have to join in and say that I have a stake. It worries me. My child may have everything, but the fact that many children no less deserving than my own have no futures and continue to have no futures. I think that is something that we have to create a stake for. I mean, yes.
I guess like one thing I worry about is that how, you mentioned this briefly, but Modi talks about creating a big market economy with the 400 million middle class people that you have, right? And you talked about how you will have these bulging bags from the malls. But how are we going to, this is my big worry, is how we will support that with the current ecological constraints that we have in an era of like climate change, peak energy, water shortage.
Yes, so what Modi, Bush, Manmohan, all of them have is that these are constraints. They feel that the IB report, which was leaked, actually, I don't know whether you saw it. It was deliberately leaked just when this new government came on. It was actually instituted by this UPA government. It was obviously rewritten and extended here. They used a very funny set of terms. They actually said that India's, along with national sovereignty, there's also something called economic sovereignty. And India's economic sovereignty is being severely compromised by people who talk the language that you did just now.
So they have named Greenpeace, AID, Vandana Shiva, all agriculturalists and environmentalists are named in the report.
And they've actually given a calculation. They've said 2 to 3% of India's GDP growth is being sacrificed because of people like this and organizations like this. So what is being said is that India's glorious future is to both protections to labor. So the answer to bad protections of labor is not dismantling the protections, but having better protections of labor. So we're not talking about that. We're not saying that the last governments have done very bad. I also feel we need labor reforms, which is really labor reforms. We have about 160, 180 legislations which are very poorly and so on. We need one labor legislation which is clear, which creates a certain set of entitlements, which is clearly negotiated, enforced, transparent to all, etc. Of course we need those reforms. So we need to do our labor protections better. But what we're really talking about is dismantle whatever labor protections we have, however weak, dismantle all our environmental protections, however weak. The new Land Acquisition Act, which is going to create some degree of better terms, they've already said dismantle these social impact assessment, dismantle the consent requirement, etc., etc. So the brave new India that Modi and his supporters want to follow is where we will. If America is not worried about environment and labor, why should we? Well, they're destroying the environment 20 times, 50 times more than us. We also should do the same. So that's one idea, and we can need to debate it. Should we be worried? Should we not be worried? But they actually said in that report, it's a very interesting report, where they've actually said that it's anti-national to be worried about. They talked about some forests in Indonesia getting destroyed. They said, why are you worried about the forests in Indonesia? Aapka kya jata hai?
Within 1 month of formation of the new government, they have dismantled the National Wildlife Board. You can just go on.
National Green Tribunal.
They've also said another
Wildlife
of the
Board.
judgments.
It was a very strong board. They
No,
have,
one of the most crucial ones actually has been
JNT
that
tax, right?
huh?
JNT tax. Yeah. Okay.
What?
There is a term called JNT tax. JNT was
No.
previous minister
No,
for environment.
your thing sounds like a real apologism. I mean, the fact that if Jayanti was corrupt, so we'll dismantle environmental protections. What is the connection, yeah?
You cannot
Don't get into this trap. I mean, it's cynical and it's. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't want to pile on to a young person, but I mean, there's no connection. If there's any evidence that Jayanti misused environmental protection, doesn't mean that we should demolish them.
No, I mean, the point is just that she blocked many developmental
Yeah, okay.
activities.
Yeah, you know.
She, the environment minister, not
The-
the National Wildlife Board.
the-
National Wildlife Board is an asset in India.
No,
and
so
they are
the fact that
academic research.
she stopped them for good or bad reasons is a matter that can be debated, and it's an empirical fact. I don't know if she was corrupt. Or you might know she's corrupt. You might have actual evidence which I don't have. But that is irrelevant to me about the fact that do we need environmental protections or we don't. They have actually passed another provision that within 100 kilometers of any border, there will be no environmental, all of those things will be done away with. Now the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, because they have, the sea is seen as an international border, the entire Andaman and Nicobar Islands now have no environmental protections.
Is he going to weaken the nuclear liability law?
Yeah, no, and so the army wanted to create, just as an example, the army wanted to create, for a long time has been agitating, saying that they wanted to create a massive firing range in the only hornbill sanctuary that they have. People, the environments have been saying, yeah, if you want to shoot, then please shoot in the direction of the sea, don't shoot in this direction, but they didn't. Now, the moment this thing has been done, they have now opened that firing range in the hornbill variety. What has that got to do with Jayanti and any corruption that she did?
You want to answer?
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
so
I have, since you mentioned corruption, I think that corruption is probably not as big a problem as evidenced by. She enjoys massive popular support.
I find it very worrying, actually, that, clearly the kind, 30 people committed suicide, I just can't believe it.
is it true? It's true.
There's a certain frenzy that is created.
Yeah.
I mean, YSR Reddy died, people committed suicide.
Yeah, no, but in spite of all this, in spite of her corruption, in spite of her state, the state has done well.
Only on the basis of Tamil Nadu, you cannot judge all of the state.
Yeah.
If the other state minister like UP and other, you can conclude something else.
No, my friend, no, but what I'm saying, what I think he's saying is that I'm not opposed to corruption because it'll, development won't happen. I mean, we have very efficient, I saw in the civil service, in fact, this was something that I used to see, that you have largely two kinds of officers. One is the highly efficient and highly corrupt. And then you have the highly inefficient and extremely honest. And that very rare combination of the extremely efficient and extremely honest. Now, am I going to opt for this one, if I have to make a choice? Is a question. But I feel that in the end, the moral fiber of a society breaks down, many things happen. That I will not accept corruption as a seemingly necessary.
But as you narrated an incident where a lady, she didn't mind losing those 50 rupees if it meant to the corrupt postman, if it meant that she was getting it at home. So the corrupt politician is the person who gets things done for the people, and it doesn't matter that he makes a little on his way.
You know, our election, I mean, YSR was also spectacularly corrupt, but he was enormously popular, I think. I'm told that he had, I mean, people who work closely with him, also in other states like Chhattisgarh, etc. They have this theory, they say they classify the departments into note departments and vote departments. So vote departments are those which he says have to be, so PDS has to work well, pensions have to work well, etc. because these are vote departments. He won't tolerate any corruption there. But other departments become the note departments where they would earn a lot of money. I don't know. I don't believe that that's any sort of sustainable moral or other foundation for the kind of state that I want to build. RTI was really valuable for that reason. It allowed us to challenge.
Nothing is done about offshore money, and nothing is done about how to mobilize gold. There's so much in the landscape.
So the recent, like one of the more popular rhetoric from him was the river interlinking project, and I mean a lot of environmentalists and social activists are against that notion, and as we recently saw that he gave away the water in Narmada to Coca-Cola. So what do you see like a long-term implication?
The river linking is, of course, rivers are our whole life. You know, there's whole sets of a whole ecosystem built around rivers, and you know, it's like some villager had actually said, it's like saying we'll suddenly do a pipe between you and me. You know, you can't. We have distinct life forms and ecologies and systems. So I think that it'll be hugely. I mean, there's enough evidence to that effect. But Ahmedabad, you know, where the Chinese premier was made to walk, etc., was actually, those places were dense habitations of slums, largely of Muslim populations who were popular. I saw them over the years. But he did have the surgical capacity to break down those slums, to uproot them, to disperse them into the very far peripheries. He did divert the Narmada waters into Sabarmati. So it looks so beautiful because you have a flowing river, you have you know, clear stands where you can take the Chinese premier for a walk and so on. But what is happening to the lives of those who were there? So it's a prioritization. So I mean, all of this, in the end, who are the winners, who are the losers? Do we agree with that, with those choices? It's something that we have to make choices about.
Excuse me. So you could like Modi speak very well to the young generation, and like people like us have a lot of expectation from Modi government, better India, more Indian economy. So as we expected a lot, Modi is going to deliver. It is similar to the last government.
Up to now, see, as I was saying that the jobs that he's promising for the millions of young people, I don't see I don't see a better implementation of Manmohan economics going to yield jobs, because they never yielded jobs in the first place. For example, so I worry that about that. I worry about his majoritarian politics, etc. I worry about the dismantling of the idea of the welfare state. And I worry about the promises to young people, which I feel seem impossible to me to implement without a very different kind of vision.
But isn't that a little too early to say? I mean, he's been there for only a few months. So shouldn't you be giving him a little more time to...
No, I don't want to judge. I have seen Gujarat, and basically we're talking about the Gujarat model. We've studied it very carefully. And these are the facts of the Gujarat model. There are no doubts about... See, what happened in Gujarat? Gujarat had very high levels of economic growth, very good investment. Private sector took infrastructure. The roads have been developed well. The highways have been developed. The ports have been developed. All of that is there. The cities are good places to live in. Electricity is uninterrupted. All of that is there in the positive. But on the negative are these very strong, irrefutable facts. It has some of the lowest public investments in health and education. It is, its malnutrition levels are incredible. As I said, below UP and Bihar. It has some of the highest levels of labor unrest in the country. These are also realities. So, displacement, land acquisition, all of this, environment, all of them were given very short shrift. So, what he stands for, unless he's saying, I'm coming with a new ideology, then let's hear it. But at present, he's saying, I'm going to implement the Gujarat model. This is the Gujarat model. We've studied it very carefully, we've observed it. Some people, like Jagdish Bhagwati, who's a very well-known economist and Parliamentary, etc., say that, no, that is a good model. We should not be investing in health and education. They feel that we should let markets function. In effect, postponing the poor should wait for a generation or two. That is one view. So I think we have every reason to have apprehensions, because this is his ideological position.
How is the Gujarat model different from what the Planning Commission were doing so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is actually, between him and Montague, Chidambaram, Manmohan Singh, their economics are pretty similar, except that Manmohan Singh was continuously pulled in a different direction, also by people who believed in the idea of welfare. Mr. Modi promises to be much less encumbered. He promises to do what he believes in much more efficiently, much more surgically. That will be the difference. The RSS though has also already, when he talked about weakening the Land Acquisition Act, there was, the Bharatiya Kisan Sangh, which is the farmers' front of the RSS BJP, has raised very strong objections. So after Nitin Gadkari talked about amending the Land Acquisition Act, they've sort of become a little quiet. So it's not as if he'll also be untrammeled. But he's been shown himself, he's shown everybody their place, he's shown Advani their place, he's shown this one their place, he's shown that one their place. He might well implement that model much more efficiently.
Yes. Sure. So my question about the food grain which are we harvesting. So what is your idea that what government should do that needy people will get the food? And is our rationing system is bad? We have to change, or we have to improve that rationing?
But I can, okay, very briefly, 3-4 things. Firstly, they abolished private traders. it became a public system, because what you used to have, especially in tribal areas, rural areas, the money lender, the most exploiting sort of person would be also running the PDS shop. So that change, if it's a cooperative, it's a panchayat, there's a certain degree of greater accountability. Number two, they have what is called, then second was margins. The margins are so low. Today the margins in a PDS shop is that if you run it with great honesty, can you guess what will be the total net earnings that you would earn? Not counting your labor, not even giving a value to you, zero cost to your labor, is about 1,500 rupees. So obviously it's designed for corruption. So if anyone's running a PDS shop, they obviously are making money, otherwise you can't run it. So you have to make the margins realistic. So that was the second thing they did. The third is what is called doorstep delivery. Now, what the PDS normally requires is that the ration shop owner goes to the FCI godown, picks up the grain, and he picks it up, whether he picks it up, doesn't pick it up, pays money along the way, gives it to a rice mill, etc. Sitting in the village, I have no idea about what my allocation is. Now, doorstep delivery says that it is the duty of the ration shop owner will not pick up the grain from anywhere. It will be delivered to his doorstep by the state. So, gaon walon ke samne, when 80 bags of cement, grain have been downloaded, it is very hard for him to then market it in the way that I didn't know whether the 80 bags or the 2 bags, whether they've been allocation or not when he goes out. So, doorstep delivery is a very critical thing. Then they did end-to-end computerization, very interesting things like SMS alerts. So people in the village, and there's always an opposition, the Sarpanch has somebody this thing. So anyone can say, I want an SMS alert. So when 80 bags of cement are allotted, I will get an SMS alert. So you cannot come tell me tomorrow that there's no grain allocation. Then they did very interesting GPS. They put a GPS onto every truck. Now you actually can sit and track. FCI go down, say truck nikla. So if it gets diverted and goes off into a rice mill or something, you can see it actually on. So these are interesting things, and they've done all of this. I've seen, and they've been extraordinarily effective. So any public system can be improved if there's a will to do it. The will is missing. This particular chief minister, BJP chief minister Raman Singh, his popularity is based entirely on making this PDS system work, and he's called Chawal Wala Baba.
I can have many questions, but I'll probably ask a couple.
One, please.
Okay, one. Okay.
We have been probably tortured him for 2 hours.
No, he has been answering questions very well, so I think.
RTL limit is 2
minutes. Okay.
Give me a little bit of coke, just this much, please. I have to equip myself before I hear your question.
Yes. We call this Narmada water.
Man, ask Ravi to, dig out some water from.
They have said that it is basically an employment program. So the material component had to be, you had to spend very little on materials and a lot more on giving people work. Now, their programs like afforestation is fine, land development is fine, watershed is fine, but you cannot use it for construction kind of activities. But this government, it has passed this thing of removing this ban on the number of materials, which means that its capacity to generate employment is actually going to go down.
Yes. Go down.
Yeah. So you can buy cement
because you spend it on cement, you spend it on materials.
So so final question.
Let me ask.
So one question, please.
मैंने एक भी नहीं पूछा. So a recent study, like some psychological department in Harvard has come up with an interesting study about how the intellectual people at the top or top 2% think about social justice is that eventually technology is going to solve the problem. And that's what we have seen in the recent elections also, and with my conversation with a lot of people from IITs and at the top. So I somehow feel that when we explain it to them, they understand and then they convert back. But the medium is missing to reach out to them. Like earlier the newspaper used to be excellent, like the Hindu or the Times of India. Now that medium is also gone. So how do we, as a group, like reach out to our colleagues and?
Yeah. No, I think that you have to have much more nuanced understanding. I mean, the technical, I'll just explain it with an example. Sanitation. At least one of the things that everybody felt very pleased about was this declaration of 2nd October as sanitation. The last column I wrote, in fact, just before I came to the US, it's not yet come out, is basically to say that something like sanitation is also intensely political. It's not a techno-managerial challenge. It's linked, why do you think, the fact is that in the world, 1 in 5 people openly defecate. In India, 1 in 2 people openly defecate. Rural India, 4 out of 5 open defecation even today. Why is it? It's deeply embedded in our ideas of caste. The handling of a human excreta is considered polluting, but you also have a class of people whose job it is to clean up after you. And most of it is women. So to say that we're going to provide toilets in every school is not a solution. It's a technical solution. It's a brick and mortar solution. But who's going to clean those toilets? What has been found in rural schools across is that Dalit rural